I'm Dr. Carine of PurelyIntegrative.com. I'm a primary care pediatrician who practices integrative medicine, which means that we take all of what modern medicine has to offer to our patients and add along holistic medical care of diet and supplements and wellness training to the full care of our patients. Early on in my practice, I realized that it was difficult for parents to navigate the complicated products of supplements. FDA doesn't regulate how they're labeled, and there's large inconsistencies between products. And so I started my supplement business to help parents navigate that difficult selection process. Now we carry supplements that are pure in their ingredients labels from reliable companies that I can trust, that the products are actually contained in the product and that they've been tested for contaminants. But even more important in a pediatric practice is, do they taste good? Will the children take them? Are they products that will be easy to administer to your children? Over time, we've amassed a knowledgeable staff and a well-organized website that's easy to navigate and a customer loyalty program. And so now we're doing these talks to help bring some of the knowledge we have on the care of children to you, to make it easier for you to understand how we utilize some of these issues. Today's topic is constipation, and it's actually part 2 in a constipation discussion we started last week on addressing the habit of constipation. We have both the habit of constipation and the causes of constipation. Today we're going to discuss the causes, and it's very important to understand that both of those things are at play as you manage a child whose symptoms may be of constipation. Our body gets in rhythms, and we do things with a circadian rhythm, and we have a habit each day of the way we eat and sleep and go throughout our day, and constipation is very much tied to that. So changes in routine can change a child's pattern of stooling, even if they don't have any major medical problem that contributed to it. So when we try to address constipation, we have to work on that habit first. Otherwise, it may feel like things aren't really working or that you're not getting any progress. Today we're going to address the causes of constipation, which I think a lot of my families are very interested in. I frequently hear families say, well, I don't want to put my child on a laxative or a stool softener every day and not address the cause of constipation. And many times families have tried to do that research on their own, and they've tried many things that they've read about, and they've failed at doing any successful treatment of their child's constipation because they didn't do the habit first. So always remember treating the habit of constipation first, and then we can move on to addressing causes of constipation either at the same time or after we've addressed the habit. Sometimes after we address the habit, we find out that the cause was something simple, like they got a virus, they got constipated, and they started stool holing. And all we need to do is address the habit, and it'll reset, and they'll just be fine again. But then there's lots of other reasons why children can end up with causes of constipation that are more complicated. If you look at constipation, the reason that we get constipated is because the stool isn't moving through your bowels at an appropriate speed. There's really 2 big categories for why that can occur. You can have either low muscle tone, and that is oftentimes related to a more major medical diagnosis, like a chromosomal dysfunction, like Down syndrome or Prader-Willi. You could have a neuromuscular disease, like spinal muscular atrophy or muscular dystrophy that actually changes the way your muscles act. And if your muscles are weaker in all of those gross and fine motor skills, they're also going to be weaker at propelling food through the bowels. And so if we're addressing that cause, we need to really focus on keeping the stools very soft and the bowels very lubricated, because those bowels have to work a little harder to keep moving along. The other big reason is that the nerves that drive your bowels to move through are very complicated, and you can imagine they have to coordinate that muscle movement to keep it moving forward, and that's a very complex process by your nervous system. The nerves that do that can be affected in their ability to move stool through effectively across many ways. They can either have poor coordination that's related to your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. They can have poor energy stores that make the cells weaker to function and fire appropriately. And then they can also have inflammation in the bowels, many times at low-level inflammation, that will interfere with the nerve conduction and everything. Today we're going to talk a lot about the inflammation component. One of the big misnomers in medicine is that inflammation always leads to diarrhea, Because in severe cases of inflammation, like full-blown celiac disease or ulcerative colitis or Crohn's or big malabsorptive diseases, diarrhea is your prominent symptom, and that's always much more concerning. That means that your body may not be absorbing enough nutrients, and your breakdown of your bowels has become more severe. But in milder cases of inflammation, you can become constipated, and that's not as well recognized sometimes. That inflammation and regulation of your bowels can be triggered by a variety of things, from food sensitivities to abnormal gut flora that is occurring in your bowels, and a breakdown of the gut mucosal barrier. So let's talk about each of those. We have all these bacteria in our bowels that help us in regulating a lot of functions, from our nervous system to our inflammatory system and our digestive system. We like to think that we're independent organisms, that we are in control of our whole body, but we actually live in this symbiotic relationships with these tiny little bacteria that communicate between our nervous system and our gut, and we are completely dependent on the way that those organisms communicate with us. If we have food sensitivities, then that can be like a background, very mild inflammatory process that is triggering responses in the bowels, and those are sometimes kind of hard to identify, but they are a cause that we can end up with constipation. The most common of those would be cow's milk sensitivity, and so they've even done some studies that looked at children with constipation, and they said if we took all the kids that presented into the office off cow's milk for a period of time, how many of those kids would start to correct with their constipation. And the numbers in some of the studies were staggeringly high, like 50% of the children, that was their only cause of constipation. So food sensitivities can definitely play a role, and it's not always cow's milk, it can also be other things too. Then we have the breakdown of the mucosal barrier. The mucosal barrier both secretes mucus into the stool so that it can move through easier, and it creates a barrier between what should be inside your bowels and your bloodstream. There's a lot of things that your bowels process that are not intended to be in your bloodstream, but when you get inflammation, you can have breakdown of both the mucosal barrier, like the actual lining of the bowels that keep it from coming in, and then the junctions between the cells, which is called leaky gut syndrome. When that's occurring, then actually food proteins and inflammatory markers that are intended to stay in the bowels are now getting into the bloodstream and can cause a havoc on a whole bunch of different bodily functions. If we're going to try to address that, we could do that through diet changes and things that we're not going to talk about today, or we could use supplements to help us with that. The ones that we're going to talk about today are digestive enzymes, GlutatShield, and probiotics. I want to talk about digestive enzymes first, because we talk about this food sensitivity that can trigger you to throw into an inflammatory cycle. Changing children's diets is very difficult, both because they get in the habit of eating certain foods and because it's difficult to identify which food we should remove sometimes. Sometimes it's more obvious, like cow's milk, but then other times it could be soy or gluten or corn, and those are very difficult to put our finger on sometimes. I often refer to digestive enzymes as kind of a cheat way of doing a diet change, because it will help break down those proteins so that they trigger less inflammatory response. Of course, if you have a more traditional serious food allergy or celiac disease, the enzymes would not be enough. You would want to avoid those foods completely. But if we're looking for foods that might just lead to constipation, then it's a really nice way to start. Changing children's diets is really tricky. Both from a social aspect, because they feel isolated if they can't eat with their friends, and because these foods are not as available or they're not familiar with them, and so using enzymes can help us with that. For our small children, we use digestive enzymes that are chewable. This product is called ProSol, and it is raspberry flavored, chewable. The kids usually really like it. We also have another digestive enzyme with a different flavor that we stock, because each child's a little bit different. We also have capsules of digestive enzymes these both are vegetarian digestive enzymes. They're derived from plants and papaya and sometimes mold, that they extract out these enzymes that break down the food. And they're usually very well tolerated, and they probably are the most common form of over-the-counter digestive enzymes. Sometimes, however, we have patients who are sensitive in an allergy category to those plants or those products that they use this for. And if that's the case, then we'll use animal-based enzymes. These are derived from the actual pancreases of cows or pigs, and they're put in here. Because they're mammalian, they're much less likely to cause the same allergic reactions that sometimes the others do. And so we use those. Those only come in capsule form though, and so they're difficult to give to children. We use those more often in adults. Whatever your decision in choosing digestive enzymes, we have a lot of products available. These are just some examples that our staff can help you with. The other product that we have that many patients use for constipation is GluteShield. GluteShield is actually a blend of products. Last week we talked about the habit of constipation and the use of aloe water for that. GluteShield has aloe in it. So aloe both softens the stool through osmotic gradients and also increases mucosal secretions so that you end up having a more lubricated stool. But this also has glutamine, which helps with the gap junctions, and zinc, and some licorice and several other products that are all intended to help build that mucosal barrier and tighten up the gap junctions in the bowel to reduce leaky gut syndrome. It comes in chocolate and vanilla. We also have this larger category of probiotics. So probiotics are a way for us to try to support and regulate that bowel flora that is in your bowels with all those good bacteria. And they're a very complicated topic of their own. What's important to note about probiotics is that they're one of the few products that are very difficult to buy in stores that for the same quality and price as they can be through physician dispensed. They take a lot of handling to keep live because they're actually live little bacteria. And so if they're in a store, there's a lot of middlemen between the manufacturer and the shelf, and so the price of that product has to go up to maintain its quality assurance measures. Whereas with physician dispensed probiotics, there's not as many middlemen, so those products typically are a better value when dispensed through a physician's office. We have large categories of like chewables and powders and high dose probiotics and lower dose probiotics, and that's a topic in and of itself. So next week we're going to do an entire talk about how to choose the right probiotic. But suffice to say, quality and the amount of live cultures and the reputability of the product is very important. The FDA does not regulate how we label probiotics, and you always know that you have a probiotic that's of questionable value if it's labeled in milligrams or if it says proprietary blend with a whole bunch of things listed. These are all signs that the product is not as reliable as a product that lists its actual individual ingredients in its colony forming units. And that's something we can help you navigate if you talk to our staff at Purely Integrative. So everything we talked about today is on purelyintegrative.com. And if you have questions, you can talk to the staff. And we hope that this helped you today with choosing those products for your child that has constipation. And next week, we'll be here to talk about probiotics more. Thanks. Bye-bye.